Hey guys, Reaper here, just doing a second timeline for our video about early wars and research. This is part 2, enjoy. Also under evocation, Earthquake. Earthquake is great because it's a knockdown, it can screw up mage scripting. It's phenomenal versus mages. It hits you too, but a lot of your troops, if they're more armored, let's say you have, 16 armor on your average troop, or you have actual armor put on your mages, this is fine. This won't hurt them because it only does 8 armor piercing damage. It won't really do much to them, but it will stun people, knock them down, and do enough damage to the unarmored people. So this is really good against horde style nations. Consider rushing evocation if you're running into those kind of horde style nations. Magma eruption's another one. If you have a fire, its area of effect is huge. It does great damage that's magic, even though it's just blunt damage and it's not armor piercing or anything. I still like this spell because 22 damage requires somebody to have essentially 22 protection, which is really hard to hit now in Dominion 6 since all the protection nerfs and everything else. So this actually does quite a bit of damage, and it leads a lingering cloud so it can burn people. It's quite nice. I like this spell in Dominions 5, and I like it even more now that armor's been nerfed. And once you get up to the higher levels, I figured Rain of Stones was necessary to mention. If your mages don't have helmets, be cautious with this. It hits the battlefield with 5 points of mundane blunt damage over and over and over with head hits. This is brutal. It'll help if you have shields, but your mages don't have shields, and if they don't have helmets, and you're a human nation, people are going to be casting this on you all the time, and they're just going to be thumping your mages in the head and screwing everything up you're trying to do. Now, if you're looking for more damage for your armies, we have the version of Strength of Giants, and then Gift of Giant Strength, which is AoE 3, and then Giant Strength Warriors, area of effect 20. Strength plus 4 isn't always just damage plus 4. Remember, sometimes it's damage plus 6 for two-handed weapons, and weapons of sharpness combined can make it pretty bonkers. If you start putting weapons of sharpness on your troops, you're going to start cutting through a lot more than you think, and even at level 6, when you get Earthquake Warriors, blunt and slash melee attacks can stun. There are a lot of good troop buffs in enchantment. Like I said, Earth mages are not going to be struggling to find things to do. Now, one good mention I want to do is in 11 statues here at level 6. This gives you 10 plus statues, and these statues have 20 protection, 0 encumbrance, and they do decent damage. 11 statues is a good investment, but it gives you really tanky troops for a front line that you can either scatter amongst your troops or use on their own. They're actually pretty tanky, so they go really well with all the other Earth spells because they resist a lot of the low damage stuff that Earth is known for in evocation. So try it out. All right, now water. Water elementals, like I said, the lesser water elementals are not that great. They have 1 armor piercing attack, but these water elementals have 4 armor piercing attacks per round, and if you're in an underwater battle, you need to summon these. This, I would even argue, if you're in an underwater nation, you don't rush Conjuration 5, you're dead, because everybody else is going to rush it, and these guys get underwater regeneration, and with those armor penetrating attacks, they're going to stomp over you and crush you if you don't have them. That's enough to be said. Anybody that's run a Water Nation battle knows exactly what it is. It's a rush to Conjuration 5. As I've mentioned before, Fire Resist under Alteration 3 and Winter Ward under Enchantment 3 gives you 5 Fire Resist and 5 Cold Resist, respectively. Easy way to get you resists against aura-based battles. Somebody coming at you with a Heat Aura or Cold Aura, this will help a lot. Or versus low damage evocations like Firestorm. Under Alteration, we have a spell called Quickness. This does an AoE 1. You would be surprised how much it helps to give your troops in little point buffs, +2 attack, +2 defense, and double the amount of attacks they make per round. This is particularly good on troops that have more than 1 attack per turn because it doubles every attack. For thugging, you can go to level 4 if you want to thug yourself, get Liquid Body. This is a great all-in-one encompassing thug spell. It grants you a bunch of resistances, but more importantly, the Wound Fend, the affliction resistance, helps a ton. It just makes it so your thug who's trying to go through a ton of battles doesn't pick up those afflictions that end up killing them all the time. And again, at level 6, Frozen Heart. This is great against elites. Spam it on them and watch them die. Evocation 3, now that you're talking about army battles, is far more effective. If you're against an Abyssian player, they're going to hate you if you cast this in every battle, and it's going to give you great effect because it's going to double their mages' fatigue, 50% more fatigue, and it's bonkers how much it does. Rain, back in the day when I used to play a lot of Abyssia, I used to hate this spell. It's just, it's such a killjoy. But if you're the one with the water magic, then you got to know about it. If you're fighting me, however, you forget this spell exists. You hear me? A good mention under Evocation 6 against Undead is if you are a Water Nation against Undead, this Cleansing Water spell does some solid damage, and it requires low magic paths. That's the only reason I like it. Low magic mages can use this against Undead, and it does a lot of armor negating damage. And this doesn't seem like a lot of damage, but against, Long Dead, this pretty much knocks them out. So it's a good one to mention. The other thing you want to consider is Falling Frost. This is kind of like the cold damages armor piercing AoE attack, but you have to know notice that the damage is so much lower from the fire version, which is Falling Fire's 15 armor piercing versus 10 armor piercing. So it's a little harder to want to cast. Now, this one only has a 6 area of effect, and the Falling Frost has a larger area of effect, and it leaves a lingering cloud of cold. It's great if they don't have resists, but if they do have resists or, 20 plus protection, I wouldn't necessarily bother. All right, now we're back to air. In larger battles, you're definitely going to see people spam summon air elementals, the size 7 tramplers, so be expectant of that. That's a very dangerous thing to do, and they will most certainly do that. But if they're going to be having mages get up to Air Magic 3, they're most likely going to cast the Alteration 5 Storm spell. This reduces precision by half for all people that are not storm immune. It's going to cut down half of the archery fire. Clouds dissipate twice as fast. Fire magic costs 50% more. Fatigue. It does a lot. But the thing it does most importantly for air nations is it gives them access to summon storm power, which gives them air magic bonus +1. Considering how much air nations like to spam lightning bolt and thunder strike, this helps them a lot because the fatigue cost is 50. So if you have a level 2 air mage, you can't even cast this, but if you have a level 3 mage that can cast this and you jack that 3 air up to 4, it helps you with your fatigue quite a bit and gets you quite a few more casts per script than you would get otherwise. But air nations almost always are going to spam air elementals, and they're going to be spamming things like mist form under alteration. You can drop this on a little group of your soldiers, and if somebody doesn't hit them for more than 25 points of damage, then they're just going to take 1 point of damage. This greatly increases the life of your troops, and in fact, the late game version of it, Fog Warriors here, or Army of Mist, I guess is the late version now. This will end games for people. This will win entire battles because it's so hard to get damage on these guys without just some lucky big roll, big hit. It's even more effective for armies than it is for thugs and super combatants because you don't need just one, you need to hit everyone with something higher. Something Air Magic also has that's really good is they have a way to resist archery, air shield. Generally speaking, I don't see air nations casting air shield and protective winds and that more because they can just cast storm and it basically does the same thing. Half of the archery is already shut down and then precision's reduced by half. People don't have to worry about it as much, but it is there. Figured I'd mention it. Corpseman construction here. If you get a Corpseman, 1 air gem, and you get 1 Corpseman, they're tanky and they resist lightning, so they're great for air nations. But the thing is, if you get a lightning rod and a storm spool, for 1 gem, you're going to get 7 tanky troops. That is what you should expect if you're running against an air nation and they can craft those items, because they're going to spam these guys out. And I think they have 20 something hit points and they're pretty darn tanky and they resist shock, they resist cold and poison. So their Corpseman spam is pretty doable for air nations. Also, you have the ability to give your people more precision. True Shot is an area of effect 1, grants precision +4. That helps with mages countering the effects of storm. True Shot Warriors does the same thing, but in a much larger AoE. This actually helps a lot, especially with lightning bolts and thunder strikes in a storm. It makes them kind of bonkers in terms of evocation. Now, if we're going to Astral, we're going to take a look at the obvious Astral spells you're going to see. You're going to see Power of the Spears, where a mage buffs themselves in all paths except Blood and Holy. You're going to see Light of the Northern Star. Be careful casting this against another Astral nation, because sometimes you can unlock spells they wouldn't have access to, and if they're planning on that, they can really pull some funky stuff on you in return. Still, good buff spells, because if you use Power of the Spheres and then you use Light in the Northern Star on another mage, you just buffed your guy twice in Astral, and that gets pretty bonkers pretty fast. Body Ethereal is a good point buff, gives an AoE 1 Ethereal troop. That's really good against non-magic weapons, and a lot of people don't have spammable magic weapons. Evocation 5 has Stellar Cascades, which is a very big thing to note because this fatigue damage is ridiculous in a large AoE, and people will spam the heck out of this. People will line up 5 or 6 mages just dropping this over and over and over, and since they're Astral already, you know it's really easy for them to get a communion to just spam this and hit you with it. Even if they don't communion up, they're going to be able to hit you with this 6 times essentially with each mage. This will lose you battles getting hit with this over and over and over. Under Enchantment 7, we have the battlefield-wide anti-magic. This grants their troops a lot of magic resist, which helps defend against basically everything Astral magic does. But Spell Ward does it in a smaller area of effect, and frankly, this is a big enough area of effect to do it at a much much lower level, so it's something you have to actually expect to see now pretty early since it's in Enchantment 4 instead of only locked behind Enchantment 7. And under Thaumaturgy is the typical, Horror Mark, Mind Burn, Paralyze, Soul Slay. Not too much in terms of AoE in here to do. They're all single target. They will spam these, and more importantly, you're going to see these two spells right here, which I've already done a video on. You're going to hate these spells once somebody knows how to use it, but not much you can do about it without just targeting the specific stuff they're doing. Glamour spells, you're going to have Group Blur under Alteration 3. Good area of effect, and it basically gives attacking units -2 attack unless they have True Sight or Spirit Sight. Pretty simple buff, but 2 points in defense is pretty good for elves, and they usually have access to this, so you're going to see that a lot, and you might want to counter with some of that high defense counter stuff that I mentioned earlier, like Earth Meld. Under Alteration 4, we have Twilight, which gives all units -2 precision unless they have Dark Vision or True Sight. You can gain a benefit from that, and all Glamour mages gaining +1 Glamour skill, that's great, but the fact that in order to get Nightfall, which is like Ghetto Darkness, you have to cast Twilight first, it feels like too much of an investment with a 200% casting time, and then a 200% casting time, and a 200% and 100 fatigue and 100 fatigue, as well as 1 gem, 1 gem. It feels like too much of an investment unless you really are bringing a lot of Glamour mages to the battle that can all benefit from this. So if you're doing a boatload of point buffing with your Glamour mages, go ahead. I mean, if you're doing Shadow Warriors though, I feel like that would be far more effective for the same gem with a lower casting time and a 20 area of effect. I mean, this just seems better for a point buff to me in early wars. That's what I would lean on. Gift of Displacement down here, this is phenomenal, but it's small. So if you can get somebody, because it's a low level requirement for spellcasting, if you can get somebody to spam this, your troops are really, really hard to hit without True Sight or Spirit Sight. I can't emphasize the difference between Gift of Displacement and say Group Blur enough, or Blur. Gift of Displacement's only one area of effect, but those troops are almost unhittable if somebody doesn't have Spirit Sight or True Sight. So it's pretty vicious. Try it out and I think you'll see what I'm talking about. Illusory Army gets a special note because it gives you 20+ troops and you get an extra 5 for every extra level the caster is. Generally, you're just going to expect 20. The thing about Illusory Warriors in Dominion 6 is in Dominion 5 it wasn't that great because their damage wasn't the same as it is now, this false damage. False damage now can kill people. So this is actually a massive force multiplier that will help out a ton. And this is actually a really good spell to cast in combat because you can spam people with it. You'll see it for sure against Glamour. Now, one thing that we haven't had very good access to before is Shroud of Splendor for all 1, Gift of Splendor for all 1, and Aura of Splendor for all. These are great little spells that just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger of giving your troops awe. Normally that was, a bless only, but now your troops have awe that you can point buff. That's pretty good to throw on troops, especially against lower morale enemies. Against Berserk, don't bother, but against lower morale enemies, it's pretty good. In addition to that, we've got Luck under Thaumaturgy. We've got the ability to curse, sleep, give people some Despair for Frighten. Problem with Glamour is, for example, Despair is a level 3 spell, and it gives you Frighten, the weaker version, but then let's go to Death, and at level 1 you get the same Fright for a lower fatigue cost. It just feels like the weaker version. I don't really lean on this stuff. Luck, I love. Luck is great for low hit point nations, or if even better, if on your Bless you have Undying, Luck is amazing, and it's amazing to give to your Sacreds. You can also throw Slumber out there, area of effect 3, knocking people unconscious, and expect to see that if you're going against somebody with this. But you can also look at Confusion for a force multiplier, because this can make their troops start fighting their own troops, which is great because it really screws up battle formations if you do that. Now we're looking at nature. Under Conjuration 4, we have something notable, Vine Ogres. You do 3 nature gems, you get 3 Vine Ogres, and if you end up having the Ivy Crown, you can get +1. I believe it's +1 for an Ivy Crown, and it's +3 if you get the Crown of the Ivy King. So if you get the Crown of the Ivy King, you get 6 of these Ogres for 3 gems. That's great. These guys are tanky, big old fat boys. They're going to take a lot of damage for you. But Conjuration 5 has Howl. This is phenomenal if you're against somebody scripting mages or communions, because these wolves will come from all sides of the battle and start charging people, especially used in a forest or mountain. You're going to get wolves everywhere, and they're not going to do a lot of damage, but they're going to screw up scripting, and they're going to mess with what they're planning back there. Alteration 7 is a little high with Creeping Doom, because you might see this, but the lower level version you're going to see is Swarm, which you're definitely going to see people spam this. If you throw out Swarm and get 20 tiny bugs, and then you throw out, point buffs on them, ethereal buffs, or something else that you can get to make them annoying, they're very, very annoying. Swarm troops are just annoying in general, and anything you can do to make them ethereal or similar buffs is just bonkers. Luck, ethereal, that sort of thing. And now that nations like Pangea have Glamour magic access, that's going to happen. Under Alteration, you also have Barkskin, another point buff. Gives you decent protection, but makes you susceptible to fire. Make sure you don't cast cast that against Fire Nations. Web under Evocation is pretty good lockdown. Poison Darts, Breath of the Dragon, they're okay. I feel like your mages can be doing better things than this though. Basically, nature is more about like minor point buffs all over the place. Personal regeneration 10%, regeneration 10%. The good thing about regeneration too is it lowers affliction chance, haste, a lot of these little tiny buffs that you kind of want to group regen. You know, you want to give your group a bunch of bark skin, then you want to give them regeneration, and then you want to give them ferocity, and you want to give them all these little buffs and let them go out and just dominate people with swarming and hitting and beating. Because even a whole boatload of maenads can do quite a bit of damage if you buff them with quite a few of these spells back to back. And that's generally what people do. Against undead, Ravenous Swarm is a great spell against like tough thugs, like thugs, Bane Lords. Phenomenal. It's 7 armor negating holy damage each combat round, and then it hops to the next one. Great against sacred troops of the undead, which, as we all know, undead free spawn nations especially don't get a ton of the sacred, so this is a really dangerous spell. Foul Vapors is a good note. Poison clouds all over the battlefield. Really slowly kills people, and I mean really slowly. But it will do damage, and it will do noticeable damage if it's all over the battlefield and your troops resistant and their troops aren't. And you, frankly, if you're a nature mage, have better access to the protection spells. Relief is another good one. If you're in long battles against earth nations that like to cast Curse of Stones, this is a really good counter to that. It doesn't fully counter it, but it does help. It definitely does help. Death nations have access to reviving Banes and Bane Lords. You will see these guys thugging and fighting in battles and doing everything. These are guys that are good targets for anti-thug spells, but they're very cheap relative to what they do, and they're very tough, disgusting thugs because of their lack of encumbrance. Summoning ghosts is a good thing you can do. Shades, to a lesser degree. They're ethereal and stuff. Whites are okay. They do good solid damage, and they're a little tanky. But generally speaking, ghosts are the ones that have fear attached to them, and they're ethereal, and if you mix ghosts amongst your normal chaff and your normal troops, they'll survive a lot longer, and they'll do a lot more with their fear. So that's what I recommend, shoving them in the middle of other troops. Darkness under Alteration 6 is a huge spell. Every undead nation you fight is going to be spamming this as soon as they can. This is just such a good spell because it's a swing of 6 to attack, defense, and precision for people that can't see in the dark, and all undead can see in the dark, so they're definitely going to be dropping this on you. Evocation 5 has this 1 gem Shadow Blast. So you have Shadow Bolt and Shadow Blast. The difference is for 1 death gem, you're getting 8 plus armor negating damage, and it's very easy to get that plus with Skull Staffs. And it's going to do a 9 area of effect magic resist check for half damage and minor paralysis. This does not affect undead, so undead nations will drop this on you if they know the power of this. I myself have been annihilated by a gem spending Shadow Blast once or twice. Stygian Reigns, ironically enough, is good against the undead. It gives invulnerability 15 to living entities. It requires death, but then it's bad for death. Kind of a weird spot that it's in. But we also have Winds of Death. This will age everybody, and the worst part is if you do some kind of dirty mage trap where you have 2 mages walk into battle, cast this spell with a gem to reduce its fatigue, and then retreat. The way that battles work at the end of battles, if it still works like Dominions 5, I believe you'll take 20 more turns of aging after the battle ends. I'll have to look that up again later, but I'm pretty sure you take 20 more turns of aging. So you end up aging with this decay horribly with all your mages. This can be crippling to a human army if you walk in with 2 mages and drop Winds of Death twice in there, and just absolutely vicious. Or even worse, if the death mages that come in have cast Twiceborn on themselves, and then they walk into battle, they cast the Winds of Death each, and then they fight you and die, and then come back as a white mage with a +1 death magic. That's pretty brutal, and I've seen that used a lot. And by that I mean I've walked into it a lot and died to it. Behemoth is a notable enchantment summon for death. This is a giant, fat, morale safe elephant. A lot can be said about being able to summon one of those. It's expensive, but my goodness is that useful to have an elephant that doesn't have low morale and isn't vulnerable to animal spells. That's quite nice to have every once in a while, even though it's not something I would lean on. And everybody's favorite, Horde of Skeletons. I promise you, fighting Death Nations, you will see this, and as a Death Nation, you will spam this. That is just the nature of the beast. Horde of Skeletons and Rigor Mortis. You will see both of these. Rigor Mortis does 10 armor negating fatigue damage to everybody on the field except undead and inanimates. If you drop this as a Death Nation with a bunch of death troops, you're going to be just fine, and your enemy's going to be exhausted, falling apart, and as they get tired, your skeletons are going to chop them up. Terror and Frighten. Frighten is the weaker version. Terror is the actual fear. Fear makes you make your own morale check. Frighten requires you to take damage afterwards. That's the major difference. These spells are good for turning the tides, especially since they have undead and they don't care about morale at all. This is going to, as it says, friendly troops are not exempt from the effect, but your undead don't care. So spam this on people and you'll get them to rout quite a bit more often than normal. And if you're against tough undead, this spell, Wither Bones right here, like those Bane Lords I mentioned earlier, this spell is disgusting. 16 armor negating damage damage against them, and it's a large enough area that it tends to hit what you're aiming at. So it's quite nice. I hope those spells help a little bit with early wars. I know it's very generalized. It has to be, because beauty of Dominion 6 is that everything has a counter, everything has a response, and there's a better way to do things in virtually every situation. First, before we end the video, I want to discuss mages, and more specifically when to bring them out versus when to leave them back for research. My general rule of thumb is to always have mages doing something useful, whether that's researching, fighting, forging. It all depends on the circumstances. It's way too generalized of an idea for me to overly simplify, but I can give you an example of my method of thinking. If I'm being rushed by Abyssia and I need 20 more research points to grab Rain in Evocation 3, I'm willing to give up a province to Abyssian rushes and not fight for a turn to get the spell Rain before I compete with them, because then when I go in with Rain, it's going to give me a big enough gold advantage that I'm really going to like it, and I would rather wait for that. But once I have Rain or the spells I need to turn battles, I'll run out with my mages to fight immediately. Until then, I just have them research. This carries into the later game as well, as instead of having mages run out and then run all the way back to my capital, I'll have mages run out and fight and then build a lab, and they'll research there or forge there until they're ready to fight again. The hardest part about answering this question about when to bring mages out is that it always depends. Stay focused on your research until you have your major battle winning spells researched. First your early ones, then your middle ones, then your later ones. Then you take your mages out to abuse that advantage before it's gone and others have researched its counter. That's the key, is the timing. If you just finished researching Enchantment 5 for Horde of Skeletons, send your level 2 and level 3 death mages out in large armies to spam opponents and take massive provinces over and over and over and win before they get Firestorm up or Soul Slay to start annihilating your mages, because, you know, you're long dead or mindless, so they'll just start picking off your mages in the back. The biggest key to winning early wars is to ensure that you keep up with others during expansion phase, so you're not fighting an uphill battle in terms of income. And then in each battle, you carefully compare troops with notable gold cost to one another. So if you just got in a fight with somebody, gold is the primary determining factor in success. That's the one finite resource besides gems that's really tough to produce out of nothing. So if you roughly gauge the cost of your high cost troops, like let's say elephants, mages, sacreds, that sort of thing, things that are on limited recruitment versus theirs, you'll know whether you're winning or losing in general. Like I said, I know that's very generic, but I did the best I could to try to give you guys a good general set of spells to lean on and kind of have in general. It's really something that takes a lot of practice, but with this list of spells to start with, I think you'll be able to see the advantages. Now what I'm going to do is give you guys a quick little tutorial on army point buffing, and then we'll get out of here. Also, before I do my tutorial on point buffing, I wanted to point out to you guys a good example of what I mean by being adaptable in your approach. We just had a battle here between Tirnanog and Kalem in a bump. Now Kalem and Tirnanog may not be in a war, but if they bump each other and Tirnanog sees that they absolutely annihilate what you can imagine is a large investment army by Kalem, they have, you know, 10 of their sacreds, they have 15 blizzard warriors, a couple ice clad, and they just absolutely wipe the floor with them because they're Tuatha warriors and they're Sid warriors. If Tirnanog sees this, they might start a battle. So what you would do in the place of Kalem is you would watch the battle and say, what exactly can I do to change this battle? I had line troops here. They were clumped up in a group. Let's see what happens. Okay, couple blesses. We had flying troops go to the back and die. Our archers didn't do anything to them really, because they have insane defense, but they also have insanely powerful shields for protection against arrows. They have no troops that can stand up to them in melee. And so they just got wiped out. So now what we can look at as Kalem is, if we're looking at our research, fortunately, Kalem already got level 2 alteration, level 2 evocation, and level 2 enchantment. Let's take a look at some of the spells they could have here. Personal misform won't help in a little army battle. Evocation, lightning bolt, however, this will do decent damage to one person, hitting them and just deleting them. And if you're dealing with elves, a lot of times one person is important. We also have shockwave, which could hit people, but again, I've warned you about that one. And under enchantment, we don't have much here at all that we can use. So we might want to consider either summoning air elementals, which wouldn't be good because trampling does not work well against defensive troops, or evocation. We would have to be flexible and focus on Thunderstrike, because that's going to have an area of effect 1 and that's going to help us out a lot more. So I would switch over to evocation 4 and then maybe get ourselves down to storm here, just in case we got in a big fight with Tirnanog. And we'll show you the results of first fighting with lightning bolt and then switching over to Thunderstrike here in a second. All right, so now we loaded up Kalem with a slightly larger army just because they were severely outnumbered. But now we've scripted them to spam Lightning Bolt while having their archers try to pop Glamour on the Tuatha Warriors. So let's see what happens. All right, there's the mass Tuatha Warriors. I think that's our PD. Got them personal mist forming, true shotting, so they get that increase in precision. There we go. So we've got mist form, we've got the increased precision, which will help a lot with the Lightning Bolt. So let's see how well it goes compared to last time. Clearly, with this province defense, doesn't really matter, but these Blizzard Warriors do not. They're 15 gold apiece. They're not as tanky as these 50 gold guys. So we're definitely dealing with a superior army, and we would lose in a normal melee. Let's see how it goes with lightning bolts and archery factored in. Alright, we're already popping some Glamour. Good job, PD. Clearly in melee, we are absolutely no challenge for them. But look at those lightning bolts. Those lightning bolts just striking them down. And we routed them with morale. Even better. Let's check out the... Looks like a battle we definitely would have gotten stomped without the spell casting, but we got quite a few kills with the lightning bolts. The Eagle King really didn't do anything. I don't know what he was doing, running around blessing or whatever. But that just shows you scripting and shifting your... It's not a perfect example, obviously, but shifting around your scripting and what you're doing and changing your research and trying to get at certain things to counter certain opponents is exactly what you want to do in early wars. All right, and since we ramped up the troop number in that last battle to 69, I know some people in the comments are going to say, oh, it's just the troop difference. So let's check out what happens when it's just troops, 69 versus 69, or 69 versus whatever they have. There's their troops. Here's our 69 troops. Let's see what happens. Let's see how our troops do against these Tuatha. Well, that clearly went our way, didn't it? Like I said, guys, spells are important, especially in early wars. All right, guys, and a super quick example of point buffing, just so people know how to kind of set it up and kind of why it's used. I'm pretty sure everybody knows why it's used, but we got a quick little like 100 versus 100 battle here with a bunch of just infantries. If you look, we've got the Noble Warriors with 13 protection and Elder Druids buffing them with earth spells to raise that protection. And on the other side, we have Myrmidons with high protection to begin with, but they're buffing themselves with Ethereal. These mystics are just spamming Ethereal on them. And you'll see neither side has magical weapons, so the Ethereal's probably going to win, frankly, even though the base damage of 15 is lower than the base damage of 17. And these guys have bonus strength from their stuff. I didn't cast that spell, so they're still +2 damage, even though their protection will get up to probably 21 or something. I'm guessing it'll go in the favor of the Ethereal troops. Sorry. I'll start the battle over again. Now it's going to show you why we position our troops in a box around our troops. See, they're casting spells right now. Body Ethereal, which hits an entire square. So this square and this square, and it looks like this square. Now this square, this square. So we've got 4 squares with each mage group with Body Ethereal. Now they're casting it again. And so we have presumably 6 squares of body. So we'll see what happens. But you can see in a battle like this, it could go either way. And with the Body Ethereal on, I have a feeling we're going to win pretty handily. See, they just keep spamming Body Ethereal, and it makes it even better and better. This is why. Ethereal negated the damage. Ethereal negated the damage. Yep, sure enough. And that's point buffing, guys. Try it out with different buffs based on your scenarios. And you should be able to figure it out pretty easy. I'm sure after our little chat here about early battle spells, you guys will be able to figure out what buffs to use and how to give yourselves a little advantage. Remember, every point counts.